Now, the next set of papers that we'll go over was a set of notes that I wrote, Jerusalem Science Contest, Nuclear Energy, Judaic Interface. Looks like this. There it is, with the picture of Homer Simpson at the very front. I think you understand that the picture of Homer is that he is the quintessent moron that was put in charge of running a nuclear plant, which is something, if you take a look at the very first citation in Bava Kama Kaf Bet Amud Bet 22b, come in here. In the case of a fire being entrusted to a deaf, mute, an idiot, and I put in there in parentheses Homer Simpson or a minor, and damage resulting, no action can be instituted in civil courts, but there is a liability according to divine justice. That there's a rule that if a person hands a fire over to a person who is incompetent, and then damage ensues, that because it might be an indirect type of damage, the person who handed the fire over to the Chereshot of a Katan is not liable. However, there is a liability in front of God, as if to say that the person does have a moral responsibility to remedy the tragedy. Now, in the end, they come to a conclusion that the only time that there is no liability in the actual courts is when you hand over to the shota a coal, which requires the shota to do an extra action of billowing the coal in order so that a fire emanates, and that's why there's no liability. But if you actually hand the Chereshot of a Katan an actual fire, then there is real liability. So in our case in point, if you the creation of a nuclear energy facility, which would be maintained by incompetent personnel, would be akin to actually handing a lit fire to a Chereshot of a Katan, that everybody would agree that there would be liability in the event that damage ensued. So you see the principle here in this Gemara in Bava Kama that there is a concept of indirect damages in which there is no legal liability, but there is moral liability. But if you could determine that the damage was actually direct because you actually handed over to the incompetent personnel something which was just bound to do damage, and that the damage occurred because the incompetent personnel was not responsible on their watch, then there's no questions that those responsible for the maintenance of the facility would have to pay for any damage that happened. Citation number 2, we went over all of these. These are the second chapter from Bava Basra. Maybe we didn't read all of them. The first one has to do that when you dig a pit, you have to be careful to make sure that there's a certain amount of setback between what you do and the other person's pit or the other person's property line. Read through that Mishnah. Again, I'm not going to ask specific questions on the laws of the Mishnah. What I'm trying for you to understand, and if you want, whatever you want to put to memory is just fine by me. But the idea is that any type of caustic substance which is installed by one has to be done in such a way that it's not going to harm, or at least it minimizes the harm to others. Similarly, we've already mentioned before that in the previous lecture, if one puts an oven in the top floor of a 2-flat, that there's certain setbacks that need to be observed. Then on the second page, the Mishnah about trees, and Okay, take a look at that. The threshing floor we already spoke about. Carrion and graves we already spoke about. Mishnah, the concept of a tree. We're worried about the roots destroying somebody else's structure. Then if you take a look at citation number 3, this is an interesting case found in Baba Kama, citing Bedam and Aleph, in which some dates had a taste of wine because there was a vineyard which had been planted close to the date trees. And Reb Chisda, Shmuel said, he said since the vines, the grapes, had a greater value than the dates, he instructed his laborer to rip out the date trees. Then there was a case of Reb Chisda, who saw palms amongst his vines, and he again, it was a comparison. So it was a comparison of the value of the vines versus the value of the date trees. And since he says, well, since the produce of the date trees is significantly less than the value of the grapes, destroy the palm trees. So what you actually derive from this Mishnah is that the idea of destroying one resource in preference of another resource which is being somehow affected by the first resource, that is permitted according to halacha. Citation number 4 is the famous Abarbanel that we mentioned on Shiluach HaKan, where I translated at the bottom after the Hebrew citation. I translated at the bottom of the page so you could read that. I mean, everything on these pages are important, but they're not important enough. I would call them, they're skim-worthy, but I'm not asking you to memorize every single thing on these pages. Okay, then citation number 5 was that concept of the oven on the second floor. Citation number 6, when you're talking about odors in the public domain, there is a Gemara in Baba Batra 23. Rav Joseph had some small date trees under which the cuppers used to sit. Cuppers were people who used to take blood. In those days it was believed that it was healthy to every once in a while to let out some blood. I'm not going to go into the whole medicinal purpose of it. So the cuppers who used to take blood sat under trees, and blood used to fall around close to these trees. And the birds came to suck up the blood, and when they used to fly by the palm trees. The birds would damage the palm trees. So here you have these guys. So it's all very causative. So Reb Yosef said to the cuppers, take all your instruments away from here. I don't want you doing your industry over here. But Abai said to him, but this is an indirect type of damage. He replied, this is equivalent to saying that it's prohibited to cause damage indirectly. Okay, even though you might not be liable for a damage that was causative, one is not allowed at the outset to create a situation where causative damages, indirect causative damages, are going to occur. So that's this is an important distinction, and you should remember this distinction. If a facility already exists, when I say a facility, if something already exists and an indirect damage occurs, it could possibly be that there's no legal liability. But still, before this facility is installed, the residents, the environment has a right to protest because it is illegal to install a facility that will cause an indirect damage. Okay, do you understand the distinction? You can't install it if it's going to cause an indirect damage. But if it's already installed, then an indirect damage you're exempt from. not morally, but legally. So you do have the protest right. The environment, the society around the facility has the right to protest, so that it shouldn't be installed in the first place. Rav Nachman said, in the name of Rabbi, there is no legal title to things causing legal damage. There's the concept of chazaka. Do you have the right to, if you own a property, do you have the right to install anything that you want? So if the government owns a specific piece of land, it doesn't give them the right to automatically install any type of facility they want. If the facility could cause damage, whether it's direct or indirect, there can be a protest, and the government does not have easement rights, according to halacha, to install whatever facility they want. But are we not told in the gloss in the statement that Ramari says it refers, for instance, to smoke, and Rav Zvid says to a washroom. In other words, maybe the only time that we say that you can't install a facility is when it actually destroys the air quality. Rabbi Yossi said to him, I am very sensitive, and these ravens are as offensive to me as smoke or to a privy. So if the facility causes such a nuisance, a continual nuisance, like an air pollution of such, air pollution for sure, you can have a protest rights to the community. Okay, then you have the 6b setback ordinances. That is basically similar to that Mishnah that we had translated. The Rambam says, if a person had an industry in blood or carcasses, and the birds are coming because of the blood, and they're causing all types of nuisances with their chirping, or with blood which is on their feet, or they're sitting on the trees and they're destroying the fruits, then if the society, if the residents included somebody that this really annoyed, or a sick person, then you actually have to stop that blood industry, or at least set it away in a way that it can't be a nuisance. This is similar. Okay, so this 6b1 is essentially the Rambam restating which was in 6a1. In 6b2, the Rambam makes a distinction between what he calls sha'ar nezakin, other types of damages or nuisances. Any facility which could be a nuisance or a pollutant to the community, you have to give the community a chance to protest. If the community does not protest, under certain situations, the facility, once it's built, there can be no further protest. But if, in certain situations, says the halacha, that the community didn't protest, but the facility is polluting the environment, the community then can protest afterwards. And then 6b3 at the bottom, we've already said before about setbacks. Does compliance with the setback remove liability? Some say yes and some say not. All right, that's that set of notes. The next paper we're going to look at is what's called the Tshuvat Haribash. Looks like this. The Ribash was 14th century Rabbi Yitzchak ben Sheshet. He was a student of the Rashba. He lived from 1326 to 1408. And this is tshuva number 196, Kuf Tzadi Vav, in which you have two people. One name is Ruvain and one name is Shimon. And Shimon had a building, and in the building he had a sick wife and a wine storage, and the buildings was made of had walls. So here's his taina, is that at some point Ruvain came in and started a textile industry, making clothing. And they asked Ribash the following question, that Shimon makes the following complaint. He wants to protest and stop Ruvain, and apparently it was after Ruvain started the industry, and Shimon didn't say a word for quite some time, but now he's protesting, and he's bringing three arguments. Number one, he says that the industry, the textile industry that Ruvain brought in, is shaking the walls. And Ruvain says that might be so, but if the wall falls down, then you could either sell me the land and I'll build a new wall, or we can build a new wall together. Shimon's second argument was that the textile industry, with all its dyes and whatnot, is causing fumes which are destroying his wine storage. And then the third argument that Shimon says is that he has a sick wife, and that all of the pounding and the nuisance and the odors of the textile industry that Ruvain has is harming his wife. And the Ribash comes to the following conclusion, that Shimon does have the right to stop, to cause Ruvain to cease and desist his industry. First of all, from the shaking of the wall, he says that definitely is something in which there is no chazaka. Meaning, when we say that there's no chazaka, that means that even if you were given the right to protest and you didn't protest, you can still protest after the installation of the industry. So he says, so number one, he has the right to protest, in the argument by Ruvain that if the wall falls down, they could both share in the building of the new wall. He says that's nonsense. It's Ruvain who's causing the wall to fall down. There was nothing there with the wall before he got there, and so Ruvain cannot put any liability on Shimon to help him rebuild the wall, and nor can he force Shimon to sell him the spot so that he could rebuild the wall himself. He says, secondly, when it comes to the odors destroying the wine, he says that's an absolute, that is an absolute complaint, because we do learn in Baba Batra that you cannot put a barn underneath a wine cellar, because all of the noxious gases from the barn destroys the wine. And he says there's no difference if all the dyes are also causing noxious gases. That is something that you could protest, even if you were given the right to protest before. There was no chazaka made, and now you can protest and get rid of that industry. And he says, and thirdly, the sick wife argument is a good argument, even though it does say in Baba Batra that if a person opens an industry on the street, that you cannot say that he's causing noise pollution, that I can't sleep because of all the hawking going on. The Mishnah says that you can't make such a protest. Still, nevertheless, the Ribash invokes that story that we said about the ravens coming, and that was, whether it was Rabbi Yosef or Rabbi Chisda, that says that I'm particularly sensitive, and to me that's considered like a bathroom or smoke. Says that even though for the normal person it might not be a nuisance, but if we know for a fact that the person is sick, and here you have Shimon has his sick wife, and that's known, then you have the right to protest even after you failed to make an initial protest and the facility was installed, you can make a subsequent protest and cause the facility to be removed. So here you have a responsa written by the Ribash 700 years ago, which talks about the right to protest a polluting industry. The next paper we're going to look at is what's called the Tshuvos of the Maharshach. And we're going to be looking at Tshuva 98. Samachet. Now the Maharshach lived about 100 years later, in 1420 to 1602. His name was Rabbi Shlomo ben Avram HaKohen, and so he lived in the 15th century. And it's very interesting because, again, a question that came up of a person who started a textile factory, the making of bigadim, of clothing, and apparently, again, part of making the textiles are all types of dyes, and you use mixes and solutions that give off caustic smells. Now, unlike the Ribash, who said that you were able to protest and to remove it, the Maharshach brings in the concept of economy, that you have to yield. You can't completely have the facility dismantled. You can urge or force the owner of the facility to move a distance, but you cannot completely remove it. And the Maharshach writes, the nezek reach hagigios have nezek gadol, that the damage of the gigios, those are the big containers of the caustic solutions that were causing all of the air pollution, that is considered a great damage. And you could really compare it to smoke and the smell of a washroom, de'en lo chazaka, in which you has no chazaka, and therefore you're allowed to protest after the institution of the facility. But because of this factory is a parnasa to the people, it gives jobs to people living in the city, and it makes clothing for people, something which people need. People need clothing, and it also makes jobs. It is michyas b'nei adam. Yesh l'shchenim lispol nezek, that the residents should bear this nuisance, this damage, ve'en roy limchos bo, and it's not right to protest it. So it's interesting, the Maharshach, and I'm not saying that the Ribash disagrees with this, but the Maharshach brings to forefront awareness the concept that before you protest or while you protest, you have to consider the economic value that the industry has to the surrounding society. And whereas your voice might be one of, hey, this is making it difficult for us to live, there might be counter voices that say, yes, but we're getting our parnasa from this. We're getting our support. So the Maharshach concludes at the end of the tshuva, the kain im yesh makom l'ruven laharchik mimakom hagigyo shelo yasik l'shimon roi v'nocha nadavar shiarchi came. If it's possible to get Ruvain to move the industry to another place such that it does not damage Shimon, then that's the right thing to do. But he leaves open the possibility that if you're unable to move the facility, that it should just stay in its place because the economic benefit of the facility supersedes the annoyances. And maybe the argument would be is that unless you can prove that the annoyances are really causing some real damage and sickness. The next source that we're going to take a look at is a Tosefta of Baba Metzia, the 11th chapter of the Tosefta of Baba Metzia, and that is the idea of changing one facility, a type of facility, into another type of facility. It starts off the beginning, Ha'asoi likfisa. If you had a container, a cistern that was dug into the land, and that cistern was made for laundering. In other words, it was filled up with soapy water, and people used to wash their clothing in it. Then, ein mamachin biyado l'kshamim. And then the owners of these cisterns decided, well, you know what we're going to do? I don't want to use them. We're not going to use them for laundry anymore. We're going to clean them out. We're going to completely clean them out. And we're now going to use it to collect rainwater for drinking. Since it is considered an improvement of the environment, nobody has, and everybody who's been using these pits for laundry are not allowed to protest. You may not protest if a facility is now being improved to increase the safety of the society, or for a type of use which is less hazardous for the society. However, and in the reverse, likshamim ein mamachin biyado likfisa. Now, it also says in this Tosefta that if a person had these cisterns which were to collect rainwater, drinking water, and then he decided to use it for laundry, there's also no right to protest. You can't stop him from using for laundry, even though he's degrading the use of these cisterns by putting in dirty, filthy, soapy water, and they're not going to be able to use these cisterns for drinking water anymore. It's interesting because the Yerushalmi says you may not reverse it. Asuim l'kshamim yecholim chos behem l'kfisa. If the cisterns are used for drinking rainwater, you may not turn them into laundry cisterns. Whereas the Tosefta and Baba Metzia makes it go both ways. If they're used for laundry, they may be turned into rainwater cisterns. If they're used for rainwater cisterns, they can then be turned into laundry cisterns. But the point that we get out of it is the concept of a facility which was polluting can be changed into a less polluting. Under protest could be turned into, there is no protest to when the manager or the administrators of the facility want to turn it into a less polluting type of facility. And also, at least according to the Tosefta, which is not according to the Yerushalmi, if the administrators of a facility want to change it from a less polluting into a greater polluting facility, as long as it's there already, the Tosefta says they have the right to do so, whereas the Yerushalmi says no, there is a right to protest. The next Mishnah in the Tosefta, or the next Tosefta, talks about if a number of residences are all using the same water source, then they are all obligated to be involved in the upkeep of the water source, such that if the water source becomes plugged up by any one of them, the others have to come to assist and to unplug it and to clean it up. And I'm not being exactly, I mean, if you take a look through that whole source, it's not, I mean, we're talking about residences who lived on a slope. And it talks about it got plugged up at the top, so all those at the bottom have to help the ones at the top. Whereas if it get plugged up at the bottom, the ones at the top don't necessarily need to help those who are not getting the water at the bottom. Okay, that's all I really wanted to show you on that idea. Another issue is the concept of whether the sages, Talmidei Chachamim, that live in a particular city, are they obligated to contribute to the construction and maintenance of an energy source facility. For example, there's a Gemara in Baba Basra, Daf Hey, page 5, I think it's 5a. which talks about a wall of protection for the city, that Talmidei Chachamim are exempt from paying their share for the construction of and the maintenance of a protection wall to the city. And the rationale is that Talmidei Chachamim do not require protection from the wall because the merit of their studies protects them. However, that doesn't apply to a water resource, that Talmidei Chachamim are obligated to pay their fair share in order to dig for water pits, water wells, and also for the maintenance of those wells. The idea being is that the Talmidei Chachamim benefit from these water resources like everybody else. Interesting, though, that the Rambam says that should the drilling be unsuccessful and no water be found in the wells that were funded in part by the Talmidei Chachamim, their share gets reimbursed back to them, not anybody else. That if you don't find water, well, if you're not a Talmid Chacham, you don't get reimbursed back. But Talmidei Chachamim do, because they only have to pay for the drilling for wells that are successful drillings. And that's only if this rule that the Talmidei Chachamim have to pay in, that's only if others, other than the Talmidei Chachamim, have to actually physically drill the wells. But if the people of the city said, you know what, we're not going to fund any workers, we're going to go and do it ourselves, we're going to go out there, Talmidei Chachamim could monetarily fund, but they are not to go and start drilling themselves physically, because it is beneath the dignity of Talmidei Chachamim to actually involve themselves in the physical digging of the wells. Also, interestingly, is that this rule about the Talmidei Chachamim being liable to pay their share for the wells is only because wells are a basic life resource. However, if it's a cosmetic type of funding, in other words, to widen the streets or to make a public park, which is something which might be aesthetic, but it's not necessarily a basic need for life, Talmidei Chachamim are exempt from any types of payments for aesthetic beauty of the city. So we actually can glean from these halachos that special rules are accorded to sages, those people who study and teach God's law. So we've covered a whole repertoire of rulings concerning how the Jewish society must approach the building and maintenance of any type of facility which harnesses a resource, from the planning, from the actual constructions, the building codes, the personnel that have to be involved in the building and the maintenance, who is obligated to contribute to this, who are exempt, what is the right to protest, how long is the right to protest, that there needs to be a right to protest, under what situations can a protest be effective and the facility stopped, or even possibly post-construction, when is it that a protest is allowed, when is there a case of chazaka, that once the builders build it, it cannot be removed, under what situations of pollution, air pollution, noise pollution, situations of sickness, can it be removed post-construction? These are many, and this is not an exhaustive list of all the Jewish halachic input that there needs to be when considering the building of any type of resource, and including a nuclear facility.